Hold on tight. We're almost there.
Thank you, child. The storm.
It's okay. We'll make it. Don't let go of that.
I can't pay.
I didn't ask. Then why were these found in your coat pocket?
I didn't steal anything. Hold tight. We're almost there. Just a little further. Please. He's sick. Just one night.
You were not approved.
It's okay, baby. We're safe now.
Do you know who I am? Yes.
I am not afraid. What will you do? Whatever it takes to get us out of here.
Some debts are paid back in money. The ones that matter are paid back in kindness. And the largest debt in this story had been waiting 20 years to come due. She didn't know the quiet man in the corner owed her family everything. She only knew the sound of her whole morning breaking on the floor. 7 in the morning. A single crack of porcelain cut straight through Ainsley's patisserie. Emily Carter stood frozen, flour-dusted white across her forearms. At her feet lay the custard tart she had woken at 3 a.m. to bake. She had made it in the narrow window between her son's last cry for water and the first bell of her shift. "You've ruined it again, Emily." The manager's voice rang out, sharp enough to turn every head in the shop. "Who do you think you are, sneaking your little family recipe onto my display?" The bakery went silent. In the far corner, a man in a plain gray coat sat over coffee gone cold. His knuckles were white around the cup. He had come here every morning for 3 months, just to watch her work, and no one in that bakery knew who he was. His name was Nathaniel Grant. Remember that name. Everything turns on it. Emily Carter was 26, and she measured her days in a strange kind of math. Not in hours, in how many things could go wrong before her little boy woke up. Tommy was 4, all cowlicks and questions, and he was the reason she moved through the world so quietly. She apologized for taking up space, even when she had every right to it. She had been alone since Tommy was 8 months old. His father decided fatherhood was a weekend hobby, and then decided against the hobby entirely. There was no dramatic fight, no explanation, just an empty side of the closet and a text message 3 lines long. Emily cried exactly once, the night she read it, and then never again in front of anyone, including herself, if she could help it. 3 generations lived under one leaking roof, a sick grandmother, an exhausted mother, and a little boy too young to understand any of it. Her mother, Margaret, had been fighting kidney disease for 2 years, ever since Emily's father died in a warehouse fire 5 winters ago. He left behind medical debt that never seemed to shrink, no matter how many shifts Emily picked up. But Emily had one gift the world hadn't discovered yet: a custard caramel tart. Dome-topped, amber-glazed, the crust shattering at the first bite, faintly perfumed with jasmine honey. It was her mother's recipe, taught to her as a child on winter nights when the oven was the only heat in the house. And in the small hours after Tommy finally slept, she let herself dream, a shop of her own, Rosemary's Kitchen, named for her grandmother. Somewhere Tommy could grow up watching his mother build something, instead of just surviving under someone else's roof. Now, about the man in the corner. Nathaniel Grant was 52, chairman of one of the largest real estate empires on the eastern seaboard. A penthouse he rattled around in alone, no wife, no children, only a driver named Harold and a housekeeper who worried about him more than his own board did. And 20 years earlier, he had been 3 weeks from losing everything. Broke, desperate, out of options, until a young couple handed him their entire savings, no signature, no conditions. Their names were Robert and Margaret Carter. "Pay it forward when you can," Robert had told him. "That's the only interest I want." Nathaniel built an empire on that loan, and he spent 2 decades meaning to repay it. But by the time he found them again, Robert was dead. Margaret was dying slowly, and their daughter was raising a little boy alone, on a bakery wage that barely covered diapers. So why hadn't he simply said something? Why sit in a corner for 3 months, saying nothing at all? Hold on to that question. He was afraid of the answer, too. The manager's name was Denise Walsh, and she resented Emily with a very particular kind of bitterness. She was twice Emily's age, and she could not compete with Emily's talent. So she did the next thing: she made her small. It started quietly, the worst shifts, docked pay for invented mistakes. Then it grew teeth. Denise began secretly copying Emily's custard tart, selling it as a manager's special, and pocketing the markup. When Emily protested, Denise only smiled, the smile of someone holding the leash. Your staff recipes belong to the shop. And she forced Emily to write the full recipe into a ledger, locked in her office drawer. Then came a Tuesday that broke everything. Margaret was rushed to the hospital, her kidneys failing faster than anyone predicted. Emily called in, asking for 2 days. Denise fired her over the phone. Unreliability, she called it, and she withheld the final paycheck over unreturned uniform items. That was money Emily needed for a babysitter, let alone medicine. That night, Emily sat on the concrete hospital steps, Tommy asleep against her shoulder. She counted the last of her cash under a street lamp, and she cried the silent kind of crying she had trained herself into. What she did not know was this. The man from the corner table had been watching all of it. He had documented the manager's cruelty for weeks, and a private investigator had just confirmed it. Emily Carter was the daughter of the couple who once saved his life. He sat in his car outside that hospital for 2 hours, watching her through the rain, and he did not go to her. He was terrified of getting this wrong. Terrified, too, of a woman who was clearly used to men disappearing the moment things got hard. Before the strangers, before the umbrellas, before the mysterious envelopes, there was simply the math. The relentless, nightly arithmetic Emily ran in her head while everyone else slept. Rent was $1,100 a month, for an apartment with a stove that only worked on 2 burners. Her mother's dialysis copays ran nearly $600 more, even with a discount she'd fought 4 times to get. Daycare was another $240, money Emily simply did not have. So more often than not, she brought Tommy to the bakery's back room before opening, a small sleeping bag tucked behind the flour sacks. And Denise noticed. She always noticed the things that gave her leverage. This is a professional kitchen, not a daycare, she snapped one morning, loud enough that Tommy woke up crying. And Emily had to choose in front of everyone, finish the order or comfort her son. She chose her son. Denise docked her pay for the 20 minutes it took. There were nights Emily skipped dinner entirely, so there would be enough for Tommy's lunch the next day. I'm not that hungry, she'd say to Tommy, to her mother, to her. But here is the part that actually hurt. It was never the exhaustion. It was watching Tommy notice things a 4-year-old should never have to notice. The way he started asking whether they had enough before requesting a snack. The way he stopped asking for the toys in store windows. Some instinct in him had already learned the shape of his mother's silence when the answer was no. And she had made him a promise the night his father left, that he would never grow up feeling like a burden. Some nights, doing the math by the light of her phone, she wasn't sure she was keeping it. Millbrook was not a large city, and word traveled the way it does in small places. Quietly, cruelly dressed up as concern. At Tommy's daycare co-op, Emily began to notice a shift in how people spoke to her once they learned she was raising him alone. Invitations grew thinner, the birthday parties stopped coming, and a few of the other mothers, the ones with husbands who came home every night, offered a sympathy that sounded a lot like judgment. It must be so hard doing it all yourself, said with a little tilt of the head, as if Emily had chosen this, or deserved it. She stopped correcting the ones who assumed she was divorced. Rather than abandoned, it was easier than explaining. And explaining never changed the way they looked at her anyway. One mother, not quite by accident, let Emily overhear her. She worried about the kind of environment Tommy was growing up in. As if poverty were something you could catch. As if love without a second income were somehow less real. But there was one exception, an older woman named Ruth, a retired school teacher. Ruth never once asked Emily to explain herself. She simply started keeping an extra plate at dinner, in case Tommy's hungry after pickup. And without being asked, Ruth began teaching Tommy his letters, filling a gap Emily hadn't had the bandwidth to notice. Kindness like that was rare, so Emily catalogued it carefully, the way a person conserves water in a drought. Grateful, careful not to take too much, always bracing for the well to run dry. The lowest point came on an ordinary Thursday in February. 11 at night, well below freezing, Tommy asleep in his car seat. And Emily's 10-year-old sedan refused to start in the bakery parking lot. She tried the engine 6 times, then she admitted the truth. The battery was gone. She sat in the dark cab, her son breathing steadily beside her, and she allowed herself exactly 4 minutes by the dashboard clock to fall apart. Then she called the only person she could, her mother. Too weak to drive, but not too weak to talk her through it. The two of them did the math together, over the phone, while Tommy slept. And they arrived at the same grim conclusion Emily always reached alone. They would make it work. Because there was no version of the future where they didn't. So she walked a mile and a half home with Tommy on her hip. His sleeping weight ached in her arms by the halfway point. Snow soaked through a sneaker with a hole in the sole she'd meant to fix for 2 months. She never mentioned that night to anyone. The next morning she showed up at 6, on time, hair still damp from the walk, and she made a flawless batch of tarts as if nothing had happened. Because falling apart is a luxury reserved for people with a safety net. And Emily had learned a long time ago that she was the only net Tommy had. It was that same week that Nathaniel Grant first took the corner booth, watching a young woman with dark circles work with a precision that looked less like skill and more like survival, and wondering, without yet knowing why her exhaustion felt so unbearably familiar. It began with small, unexplainable things. A rainy evening, a black sedan pulling up beside her bus stop. Harold, the driver, stepped out and handed her an umbrella. "My employer asked me to see you and your boy got home safely, miss." Emily refused at first, until she saw what was on the back seat, a box of pull-up diapers, in Tommy's exact size, and a small illustrated book about trucks. The very book Tommy had been begging for at the grocery checkout the week before. She had never mentioned that to anyone, not one soul outside her own kitchen. She stared at the box, unable to speak, and the car pulled away before she found her voice. That week, her mother's overdue hospital bill was quietly paid in full by an anonymous donor. Then came a box of premium baking ingredients, with a card that read only, "For someone who deserves better tools, and for the little boy who deserves a mother who isn't so tired all the time. A grateful stranger." Then a phone call. A local event company offering her one night as head pastry chef for a private gala. More than a month's pay at the bakery, with childcare for Tommy already arranged and paid for. Now Emily was proud, and she was suspicious of gifts that asked for nothing. But pride does not pay dialysis bills, and it certainly does not buy a 4-year-old new shoes. So she took the job. Her tarts vanished off the dessert table within the hour. Guests asked who had made them. No one realized the quiet host, standing near the back of the ballroom, had built the entire evening around one purpose: to watch her succeed, and to finally find the courage to say something real. A crisis pulled him away before he could, and by the time he came looking, she had already gone home to relieve the sitter. She never learned whose party she had catered. A week later, Tommy napping on her lap, Emily was flipping channels, and she froze. A press conference, a billionaire announcing a housing initiative. She recognized him instantly, the man from the corner table, the mystery host of the gala. And something cold settled low in her stomach. Emily went to the Grant Holdings tower the next morning. Tommy left at his grandmother's bedside with a coloring book. Emily determined to understand exactly what game this man was playing with her family's desperation. She never got past the lobby. Because Denise, terrified Emily might expose the stolen recipe, had spent the week feeding a tabloid a very different story, all built on one blurry photo, Emily climbing into Nathaniel's car. By the time Emily reached the elevator, her phone was already buzzing, and that evening the headline landed like a slap. Billionaire's secret affair with single-mom bakery worker. The cruelty came fast and specific, the kind reserved for mothers assumed guilty on sight. Former customers crossed the street. A neighbor made a comment at the playground, small and cutting and close enough for Tommy to hear. That night, Tommy asked her a question. "Mommy, why did that lady say you're bad?" And that question broke something in Emily that no headline ever could. Meanwhile, the board of Grant Holdings panicked. The stock dipped. They demanded a response. And cornered by lawyers and furious shareholders, Nathaniel made the worst decision of his life. He issued a statement, denying any relationship with Mrs. Carter, calling their interactions incidental. Emily read it at her mother's bedside, Tommy asleep in the visitor's chair. And something in her went very quiet and very cold. Every gift, every umbrella, every paid bill, it all reread itself in her mind, calculated, disposable. A rich man's convenient hobby, dropped the moment it became inconvenient. Exactly the way Tommy's father had dropped them both. She blocked the number, and she told herself she would never again mistake charity for care. The truth surfaced 3 days later, and it started with the one person who refused to let it rest: Nathaniel's assistant, Priya Shah. Priya had never seen her boss behave so strangely around anyone. The standing coffee order at a bakery with no business reason to visit. The personnel file marked Carter E. locked in his own desk. And when the scandal broke, she noticed something. The leaked photos' timeline didn't match the story Denise had sold. 4 days of pulling threads led her to the truth. Denise had sold the rights to Emily's custard tart recipe to a restaurant chain for $480,000, desperate to cover her husband's gambling debts. The affair story was never real. It was a distraction, time to bury the recipe theft under a louder scandal and destroy Emily's credibility before she could prove she owned it. But Priya found one more thing in that file, a handwritten letter, 20 years old, from Robert Carter. Nathaniel, you don't owe us anything. But if life ever puts you in a position of power, and my family ever needs help, remember what it felt like to need it yourself. Treat them like people, not debts. That's the only repayment I'd want. And if there's ever a little one in the family who needs a steady hand where a father should have been, don't let pride keep you from offering it. Robert. Nathaniel read it twice, at his window overlooking a city he'd built half of. And he understood. His public denial had done exactly what Robert asked him never to do. He had treated Emily and her son as liabilities instead of people. Fix this, he told Priya, whatever it costs. Nathaniel called a press conference for Saturday morning, and he held it inside the bakery itself. Denise arrived expecting praise, perhaps a franchise deal. Emily arrived only because Priya drove to her apartment and asked her to trust her one more time, offering to watch Tommy in the back so he'd never have to enter the noise. Then Nathaniel placed 3 items on the counter, in front of the cameras. A signed licensing contract, bearing Denise's signature, a transcript of Denise admitting the fabricated affair to a reporter, and Margaret's original recipe ledger. 20 years ago, he began, a couple with almost nothing gave me their entire savings, and asked for nothing but that I become a decent man. Their names were Robert and Margaret Carter. He found Emily's eyes across the room. Their daughter is standing right there, raising a little boy on her own, and this week I let fear convince me to publicly deny knowing her. That was a failure of character, and I am correcting it publicly the same way I made the mistake. Officers, arranged in advance, escorted Denise out for fraud and intellectual property theft. And the crowd that had crossed the street a week ago, they pushed forward now, apologizing, asking if the tarts were still available anywhere. Emily stood very still, arms crossed, waiting for anger. But it came as grief instead, grief for the trust she'd lost that week. And beneath it, faint and unwilling, something that felt almost like relief. Nathaniel found her alone in the back kitchen an hour later, Tommy asleep against Priya's shoulder in the next room. You don't owe me a public apology, Emily said. You owe my mother a hospital bill you've been paying without telling us, which is its own kind of insult. And you don't get to buy my son's affection with truck books, not unless you're planning on sticking around. I know, Nathaniel said. I told myself I was protecting you from feeling indebted. The truth is, I was protecting myself from you finding out I've been a coward for 20 years. My father wrote you a letter, she said, not a question. Priya had shown her a copy that morning. He asked me to treat you like a person, not a debt, Nathaniel said. I failed that in front of the whole city 3 days ago. And he mentioned there might be a little one someday who needed a steady hand. I didn't understand that line until I met Tommy. Emily's answer was simple. Then don't fail either of us again. I don't want your money, Mr. Grant. I want a fair shot at the one thing I've wanted my whole life, earned, not handed to me like a settlement for a dead man's kindness. Then let's talk business, he said, not charity. Rosemary's Kitchen, I'll put up the lease as a straight commercial loan. Market rate, standard terms. Your signature on the line like anyone else's. No favors, no headlines. Emily almost smiled, her father's stubborn pride surfacing in her own voice. He'd have liked that a lot better than a hospital bill paid in secret. Your father, Nathaniel said quietly, would have liked you a lot better than he ever liked me. The renovation took 4 months, and Tommy appointed himself chief inspector of the site. He toddled around in oversized safety goggles Harold bought him from the hardware store, demanding to taste test every batch of custard. Nathaniel visited more often than any silent business partner reasonably should, careful never to overstep, never handing Emily a solution before she'd exhausted her own. One afternoon, he caught her wrestling alone with a display case that wouldn't fit through the door. Tommy was helping, by holding a single screwdriver very seriously. Nathaniel simply rolled up his sleeves and lifted the other end, no speech about who he was, or what he was worth. And it was Tommy, not Emily, who broke the ice completely. He climbed straight into Nathaniel's lap during a break, and announced with total 4-year-old confidence, "You're really good at moving heavy stuff. Are you my mom's friend now?" Nathaniel, a man who ran board meetings without flinching, was caught entirely off guard. All he could say was, "I'd like to be, if that's all right with both of you." Tommy considered this with great seriousness and decided that it was. Rosemary's Kitchen opened 6 months after the press conference. The window hand-painted in gold script. Home one tart at a time. The custard caramel tart, Margaret's recipe, legally reclaimed, became the signature within a month. Margaret herself, recovering from a transplant Nathaniel quietly funded, this time, with Emily's full knowledge, held court in the corner booth most mornings. Tommy underfoot in a small apron of his own, helping, by dusting powdered sugar over everything within reach. As for Denise, she served 14 months, then vanished into an unremarkable life, managing warehouse inventory 3 towns over. And hearing the news secondhand, Emily felt no triumph, only the quiet relief of a door closing gently instead of slamming. Nathaniel never staged a grand declaration. He simply kept showing up. The same corner booth, the same coffee order, eventually a small stool by the register, just the right height for Tommy, who took to greeting him at the door each morning with an enthusiastic, unprompted hug. And this man, who ran empires without blinking, still hadn't learned how to receive that hug without his eyes going suspiciously bright. On the shop's first anniversary, a small brass plaque appeared by the register. In memory of Robert Carter, who believed the only interest worth collecting is kindness, paid forward. And beneath it, in Nathaniel's own handwriting, debt finally settled. Thank you for teaching me how. And for the grandson I never expected to inherit. 2 years to the day since a shattered tart hit the tile floor, Nathaniel came back to the same corner table. No cameras, no fanfare. He slid a small velvet box across 2 cooling cups of coffee. And beside it, a second smaller box. Inside, a tiny toy dump truck, the one Tommy had been begging for. So it's official, Nathaniel explained. For both of us. Emily said yes before he'd finished the sentence. Tommy said yes to the truck even faster. Remember what we said at the beginning. Some debts are paid in money. The ones that matter are paid in kindness. A young couple once handed a stranger everything and asked only that he become a decent man. It took him 20 years, a dead man's letter, and a 4-year-old with a screwdriver. But in the end, the debt was settled, not with a check, with a home, a family, and a name over the door that will outlive them all.